Hey everybody, it's Matt Nelson here again with Jared Zimmer, and this is the Evangelization and Culture Show. And today we've got Sal Di Stefano of Mind Pump Media for an interview, and this was a great interview. There's a lot of highlights from it, and we're going to talk more about them after the interview itself. But one of the things that really impressed me was just where he's at in his spiritual journey.
Yeah, it's been interesting. The fact that they brought on Bishop Barron. So Sal Di Stefano and the whole Mind Pump Media guys, they have one of the top fitness podcasts in the world. I think they average like 1.6 million downloads a month. And, when they brought on Bishop Barron the first time, I was just unbelievable. I already knew about their show before they brought Bishop Barron on, but I was just unbelievably impressed with the type of questions that they had, the very thoughtful responses they had. And so when they brought Bishop Barron on the first time, unbelievably impressed. And then, of course, just recently they brought him on for a second time. And we actually heard from them themselves that there was a record-breaking episode for them.
Yeah, so, after just a couple days. It was pretty impressive. Well, and the thing about those guys is, like, when they first brought Bishop Barron on, they weren't, like, they're not a bunch of religious guys.
Right.
They've been on a journey since the first time they had him on the podcast, and obviously they've been following personalities in the culture like Jordan Peterson and others who have things to say of a serious nature about religion and the Bible.
Questions,
so anyways, they're on a journey, and today we got to talk to Sal about it. So let's go to the interview with Sal Di Stefano. Hey, we're here with Sal Di Stefano from Mind Pump Media. You might remember Sal from about a year ago. Him and his team went out to Santa Barbara and sat down with Bishop Barron at the mission there in Santa Barbara. So we've got Sal with us here once again. Good to have you here, Sal.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. We had a great experience with the bishop last time we were out there.
Yeah, Sal, I mean, one thing that really just jumped out to me, I'm also a fitness guy. Word on Fire just in general is kind of a fitness organization. So your conversation is also just a lot about what you guys do at Mind Pump. And so I wanted to kind of give our audience an opportunity to hear a little bit more about what you do as an entrepreneur in the fitness realm. And also kind of start the conversation more about fitness and then guide it maybe a little bit more towards what you talked about with Bishop Barron and things like that. But right off the bat, I was kind of looking forward to talking with you about fitness stuff.
Oh yeah, excellent. I appreciate it. No, I've been in fitness professionally now for over 20 years, so it's been a long time. I started out working out as a kid. As soon as I was old enough to work in gyms, that was the first thing that I did. Managed gyms at the age of 19. I owned my own facility at 22 and loved it. Absolutely loved working with people, loved training people. And I loved the transformative effects of fitness, not just the physical transformative effects, but the transformative effects it has on the whole person. And I noticed this, the first time I noticed this was when I trained a young kid, a 13-year-old boy. I was a trainer to his parents, and they asked me if I could train their son. And so I started working out with him. And he was a very insecure kid. He had some issues with school. And so they wanted to bring me, they brought him to me to train him because they thought that might help him out. And it's the thing I love about fitness is it's this really interesting kind of microcosm of how life kind of works. And I saw this firsthand, first time again through training this young guy. And he came to me and we worked out. And then the following week we worked out again, and he was able to do 2 more push-ups. And in the next week he did another 2 more push-ups. And we had this conversation where, I told him, I said, you did 2 more push-ups than last week. Do you know what that means? And he was like, well, no. And I said, well, it means you're fundamentally different. You're a different person. You did 2 more. Last week you could only do 10. This week you did 12. And it was a great way to demonstrate how hard work contributes to progress. It's a very black and white way of showing that. And that applies to pretty much everything, I think, in life, where you kind of sacrifice, apply some hard work, and then reap some benefits. But with fitness, it tends to be pretty black and white. After about owning my gym for about 14 years or so, I met my producer, Doug. He was actually one of my clients. Together, we worked together on a project for creating a fitness program. And to make a long story short, I got in contact with my co-host, Adam and Justin. They were all in the fitness space for about as long as I was. And we all sat down and met, and it was amazing chemistry. We all saw the fitness space as a phenomenal tool to help, of course, help solve the obesity and health epidemic, and also help get people to improve upon themselves. But we also saw that the fitness space was just flooded with a lot of terrible information, a lot of supplement companies and workout companies and Instagram and social media fitness celebrities that kind of preyed on people's insecurities, if you will, or maybe capitalized on them. Fitness has been used for a long time to make people feel bad about themselves. People worked out because they hated themselves. So like I go to the gym because I hate my body. I don't like myself. Versus I'm going to the gym because I love myself and I want to take care of myself. I want to care for myself in the truest sense. And so we created this podcast, Mind Pump, to communicate fitness in what we feel is the right way. And the way that we saw got our clients the best long-term results, which was taking care of yourself, learning to appreciate food for all of its values, not just for its palatability, but also for all the other values and benefits that it provides you. Also the benefits of connecting with people over food and valuing that. We didn't demonize things. And communicate the more important things in fitness and discarding the stuff that's inaccurate or the stuff that we noticed that didn't really help people in the long term. We had no media experience at all. I've had no camera experience, no podcast experience, but our experience was based off of really worked with everyday people in terms of what got them to make lifelong changes in their behaviors, for the better. And so we started the podcast, and that's the way we communicate it. It's very raw. It's very uncensored, but we're very authentic with it. And it struck a chord, and it seems to be working. And so we couldn't be happier. We think we're providing people with some real value. And for us, that's all we could ever ask for.
Yeah, I love the story too of that 13-year-old kid, because my own life, I kind of had that similar experience where I got hurt playing football and kind of had to figure out, like, what am I going to do now? And kind of went pretty deep into kind of just going down. And my dad kind of got me back into the weight room. And as I kept going and going, my grades started getting better. I started treating my parents with better respect. I started having more drive to want to achieve things. Right. And what I love about you guys' podcast and just kind of your whole ethos is looking at the person as a whole, right? Of mind, body, and soul. And particularly at one point in the podcast with Bishop Barron, you actually said you can't have health without spiritual health. I thought that really touched on something that I think, especially in the fitness culture, you guys provide something there where the spiritual side can't be ignored. So
no, you can't. And it's interesting. There've been large studies done on longevity. Some of the best studies done on longevity are studies that examine the world's blue zones. So these are areas of the world where there is a disproportionate amount of people that make it to 100 years old or older. So like a few places like Okinawa, Sardinia, which is an island off the coast of Italy. There's Loma Linda, California, the Seventh-day Adventists down there. They tend to live a long time. And so what they did is and these are the best studies on longevity that we have, because it's really hard to study, nutrition and fitness and how it affects people's health, for example, because people report, it's all done by surveys, and people, they're notoriously inaccurate with that kind of stuff. But these blue zone studies are just studies of generations. And you find, again, people in Sardinia just live a long time. And then when they move to America or another country, they start to have the same lifespan as the place that they moved. So something that's going on in these places contributes to long life and good health. And they thought they would find some silver bullets. They thought they would find, maybe they all ate the same kind of food, or maybe it was a certain type of activity. In reality, there were more general truths, but very less specifics. Like they all kind of didn't overeat. They were all generally active, but the details were very different. One area maybe ate a lot of vegetables. Another area ate a lot of fish, for example. But there was one thing that they found that was very, very consistent, and that was people who lived a long time had a good, strong sense of meaning. They had good relationships with the people around them, and most of them had a spiritual practice, or that they valued that part of their health. Now, there have been studies done by, I think Harvard did a long study on this, and they found that meaningful relationships was more impactful on your health alone by itself than exercise was or nutrition was by itself. In fact, having poor relationships was as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
So, and now that to me blew me away, because so many people in the fitness space are so body obsessed that they completely eschew their relationships for the pursuit of fitness. So it's like, I'm going to eat perfect so I can never go out with my friends. I can never enjoy those relationships. I'm only ever going to work out. I'm never going to enjoy any other aspects of building relationships. I'm not going to focus on the spiritual side of my health. And the funny thing is, they're probably doing themselves a disservice. All the focus they put on their workouts and nutrition, with no focus on the spiritual side, if you will, their health is probably suffering. So for me, this is huge. And it's true, when you look at health, you can't separate, it's everything, right? It's all of that. And there's other studies that show, and I'm a very science driven kind of individual. And there's other studies that show, for example, I'll give you a good one. When they compare married couples with kids to married couples without kids, there was a lot of articles and headlines and news after these studies were done that showed that married couples without kids report more happiness and less stress, which is funny, right? If you have kids, you probably think, oh, that's true, of course. And so the articles were like, hey, it's better not to have any kids. But if you look deeper at the studies, when they ask the question about meaning and purpose, people with children report far, far higher levels of meaning and purpose. I think spirituality is a big part of that. I think finding that spiritual purpose and meaning can make life not just bearable, but worth living. Life is difficult for all of us. We all have challenges. And I think that spiritual side, and I'm by no means extremely well developed in that area. I'm relatively new to that. I was an atheist for a very, very long time. But I'm finding a value from that I did not find in all my reading of science and fitness and working out. And there's a value there that I couldn't get from anything else, that I think you can only get from that. And that's why I think that these spiritual traditions are so strong in the oldest cultures in the world. I think that's why they're such a big part of them.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have you on, is because we recognize this hunger that people have, whether they, would consider themselves quote unquote religious or whether they consider themselves even an atheist. You look at Sam Harris and his, he's studying from the perspective of a neuroscientist, but his fascination with meditation and how he's gotten so many people on board with what he's had to say and teach about meditation. Jared said earlier, we're, in a way, Word on Fire is a fitness organization in the sense of, to use a term more familiar maybe in the health and fitness world, we're kind of like a holistic organization. Yes, we're Catholic, we're evangelical, and that essentially defines in its essence what we are. But at the same time, when we talk about fitness, at least from our perspective, we're talking about fitness of the whole person, as you alluded to. So yes, physical fitness is absolutely essential because from the perspective of a Christian, like, we're not created just as like a ghost in a machine. It's not like we're like a soul trapped in a body waiting till the day we die so we can escape from this body. Our belief goes so far as to say, like, in the end game, when all is said and done, we'll actually be resurrected bodies. So we'll still be a body, but our bodies will be perfected. And so this need to see fitness, I think, from, just from a human perspective, as alluding to more than just how strong you are, how flexible you are, or, what your heart rate is like when you go for a walk, or, whatever. All that is important, yes, but fitness goes a whole lot deeper. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is just with what some people would consider like more secular spiritual practices, like, say, meditation, or even, like, we talk about Joe Rogan a lot around here just because he's such a cultural influencer, and there seems to be a sort of interest in mysticism of some kind, even from his perspective. From a Catholic perspective, we come from a long history of mystics. And when Joe talks about, say, when he's on DMT or on some of the psychedelic drugs that he likes to use recreationally, he talks about those experiences with almost a sort of religious reverence in regard to what he encounters or whatever. So just from your perspective, could you just go a little bit deeper about how you understand in your own life, like, that deeper spiritual fitness and how you've went about trying to achieve that?
Okay, so I'm going to use a fitness analogy. Okay, if I had a pill that someone could take today and tomorrow wake up and be lean and strong and mobile and fit, would that solve all of our physical health problems? And the answer is no. As somebody who's been in fitness lifelong, I realized relatively recently, I would say probably the last 5 years, it took a long time, that the value that I've gotten through working out and paying attention to my nutrition and developing a good relationship to food is not the destination. It was the journey the entire time. You bring up Joe Rogan and his experiences with psychedelics, for example. I'll use another analogy. If I got in a helicopter and I took it to the top of Mount Everest, no doubt the view would be absolutely spectacular and beautiful. Would I have experienced the same thing as the man or woman who climbed Mount Everest? I don't think so. I think the journey is far more valuable than the destination. In fact, I think the destination is simply a side effect of the journey. And this is how I communicate fitness. And so what I've learned through fitness, I'm trying, and which I realize are truths, I'm applying now to the spiritual practices. So I'm realizing that it's much more about the journey than maybe peeking into what enlightenment looks like, or taking a psychedelic and seeing what it feels like to be what they may say close to God. I think we live in a time of look. There wasn't that long ago that we thought that if people just had access to all the information in the world, that we would solve all of our problems. It wasn't that long ago. Like if we go back 50 years and asked intellectuals, hey, look, if in 50 years people are going to have access very easily to all of the recorded information of all of history, what do you think would happen? And they would say, oh, it'd be great. Everybody would know everything. The reality is it's not the same thing as wisdom, is it? It's a lot of knowledge. You know a lot of information, but you don't have any wisdom. So for me, when I look at the spiritual side, I'm really just valuing the journey. And I'm applying what I've learned through fitness. There's no goal for me. There's no end in the sense of I'm not thinking I'm going to achieve some understanding at some point. I'm just learning to enjoy the journey and the process. And I'm forever learning and very open-minded with the whole thing. That's the other thing too. At one point I realized that I thought it was absurd that, that when I was an atheist, I thought it was crazy that people would say to me that they knew exactly what God was. I thought, well, that's insane. And then I realized how insane it was for me to say the opposite, that I knew for sure that there wasn't a God. And that's when I became agnostic. And that's kind of what led me down to the path now where now I don't know if I'd consider myself a Christian yet, but that's definitely the path that I'm going towards. Now I go to church. I very open to what I hear, and so far I'm finding a lot of value, especially when I eliminate the preconceived notions that I initially had. So, no, I think here's another example. Look at the drug abuse rate and suicide rate among celebrities. Here are people who have access to everything that we think we want, right? They have all the money that you could ever want, all the sex, all the drugs, all the fame, all the people admiring them, and yet their drug abuse rate and suicide rate is insane. We hear about a celebrity going to rehab or committing suicide all the time. Why is that? I think the answers are not in these material things, and that's just something that I'm starting to realize more now. Something I wasn't so aware of before.
Well, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because so this young fella Enzo that was following you guys around when you came out to the mission, to tape your interview, or you guys were going out to interview Bishop Barron, and he was there behind the scenes the whole time. He has a great little kind of behind the scenes account of that whole experience, and it's interesting to see his really intellectual but also in a way spiritual journey through that day. After sitting down and having a chance to watch you guys interact with Bishop Barron, and not just during the podcast, but to interact with Father Steve and Joe and have that experience of the mission, which is beautiful. And in a sort of elusive, hard to put your finger on way. It speaks to you in a spiritual way. But to hear Enzo comment on that, because Bishop Barron talked about, the St. Thomas Aquinas thing about how wealth, power, pleasure, honor doesn't do it for us. We never quite find that final resting place that we're looking for, and that seemed to compel Enzo. So that just again reminded me of the impact of that line of thinking that you're on, and I think it's a good lead into a question just directly to you. Again, now going into this whole thing about you sitting down with Bishop Barron, how did that happen? How does a team like you guys doing what you do, which is far outside the religious realm of podcasts, how is it that you ended up doing that?
Well, one thing I really value about my co-hosts is that they're also, we're all interested in self-improvement, and we're very open-minded. We'll listen to any side of any argument very open-mindedly. I think the only way you can really be sure about your position is to know the other position just as well. And they value that as well. So we're all very open-minded. And if something really strikes us, we want to know more. So kind of the way it started was, when we first started the podcast, I was very open that I was atheist. And the guys would tease me and I'd tease them back. Both of them are Christian. We respected and love each other, but we would mess with each other back and forth. And so that was kind of the relation. That was really all the spiritual talk that we had. Then we would discuss things like meditation and whatnot, but that's kind of where it stopped. I'm a big supporter and proponent of, I'm also a big economics fan. So I love economics. Milton Friedman is actually one of my heroes. And I love how free markets work. But I also realized through studying economics that the concept of free markets was such a radical idea. I'm not going to get all political or talk too deep on economics here, but the fact that at some point Western societies decided that each individual had inalienable rights, that's a crazy concept. And I valued that so much. And I thought to myself, what king would give up their own power to tell people that they all had inalienable rights? And then I learned that it had roots in the Christian traditions, that it really was this belief in God and that God created man in his own image and that we all are born with these inalienable rights that need to be protected. So that opened me up to the value of Christianity. Remember, up until this point, I'd been a little bit indoctrinated that, religion is old thought and, that's people believe that because they didn't know any better and that it was, it led to wars and killing, and we're more evolved and enlightened now. It's all about science. But then when I realized that, I said, gosh, we wouldn't have this understanding of rights and the individual if it wasn't for, if it wasn't for Christianity. That's really the crux of Western civilization that's led to the most successful, nothing perfect, but of course the most equal, prosperous societies, least violent societies of all time. Again, not perfect, but for all intents and purposes, this is the best that we've done so far, and it led to that. So that kind of opened me up a little bit to the value of it. Anyway, fast forward, and I watched a video by Jordan Peterson, and Jordan Peterson was debating somebody on a different topic, but I went down the rabbit hole and watched some of his videos, and he breaks down the Bible, but in a way that I didn't feel like I was being preached to. And it opened me up to really looking at the value of Christian beliefs aside from the mystical or mysticism part, which really allowed me to kind of open my mind and pay attention. So as I'm on YouTube and I'm watching Jordan Peterson videos, up pops up a video of Bishop Barron talking about Jordan Peterson. So I thought, let me see what this guy says, because he's obviously a Catholic. What does he think about what Jordan Peterson says? And Bishop Barron just has this way of communicating that is so, a lot like Milton Friedman, I'm trying to think of the very famous, he's deceased now, physicist that talked about the pale blue dot. What was his name? I can't remember his name right now. But he, Milton Friedman did such a good job of communicating economics to the average person. I feel like Bishop Barron does that as well, in the sense that he communicates so effectively. And as I was listening to him talk about Jordan Peterson, he compared understanding and valuing the Christian traditions and beliefs, but separating it from believing in God, like removing a plant from the soil and that it would soon die. You need to have that belief. And I thought that was a bit fascinating. And so I just went down the rabbit hole with Bishop Barron, started watching all of his videos. And one video in particular struck me. There was two. One was where he talked about the Beatitudes. And I'd heard, I was familiar with them, but never really heard anyone explain them before. And the way he explained them to me, it made so much sense. It's really about detachment from these material things. And that's where you'll find, as some people would say, enlightenment. It's not that wealth is bad. It's the love of wealth that's bad. The worship of wealth, for example. And it really struck a chord with me. I thought, this is just brilliant. Is there more brilliance like this in the Bible? So I watched more of his videos, and I loved it. And I also saw what he was doing. I said, gosh, here is someone that I think is going to use new media in a way that I've never seen anybody, any Catholic do before. Like I saw there was a lot of power here. Like he knows how to use new media, uses YouTube very well. And so I showed the guys, they loved him. And I asked them, I said, I think we should have him on the show. I think spiritual health is a very important part of health. Let's have him on the show. They all agreed. And it's one of our favorite interviews. Anytime anybody asks us our favorite guest, Bishop Barron is always top 5. He's always up there. He made that big of an impact on us. So that's kind of how it came to be. But we consider ourselves a health podcast. And this is a part of health, is talking about these things. It's definitely a part of science proves it, by the way. People who have a strong belief in God live longer, have better lives, tend to, rate their lives as better. So, if you're science-based, the science proves it, this is an important part. You should definitely look at this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there's something to the ability of fitness to teach certain things about self-improvement that go right into what you're talking about with this Beatitudes video, because what you learn, as you said, concretely in the gym, you're able, and especially the idea of self-improvement, of wanting to be the absolute best that you can be in mind, body, and soul, right? I love that you're very scientifically oriented, because that's your mind trying to say, look, I want to wrap my mind around these difficult concepts and be able to understand them well. Same thing in the gym. I want to be able to lift more weight, or I want to get more lean. Same thing in the spiritual realm. And I do think that Christians particularly can learn from maybe some things that the fitness industry is doing when it comes to self-improvement, to say, look, part of the Christian thing is living life to the fullest. It is taking that desire to improve the self to its highest power, actually, because we're talking about a spiritual thing now. So when we're talking about love between couples and love between fathers and sons and mothers and children and all that's such an important aspect to it. So I think I love that you said that's kind of the path that brought you there. Also, it's interesting that you bring up economics. We've got an event coming up with Dr. Arthur Brooks on.
Yeah, we have him on the. We're gonna have him on the show next month.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, phenomenal. His documentary, The Pursuit, was exceptional.
Fantastic.
When I learned about Pope John Paul's role in the fall of the Iron Curtain, help bringing down communism, that speech he did, I was so moved. I thought, wow, this is phenomenal. And I'm not super well versed, but I know that. That we're told that we have free will, and living in freedom is a little bit of that, right? So long as you don't hurt anybody, the only way you can grow is through free will. Nobody can force you. You can't force me to become a better person. I have to kind of do it myself. So they kind of go hand in hand, I think.
Yeah. In fact, if you can make your way down to Santa Barbara, we'll get you some free tickets to get in and come to that. It's with Bishop Barron and Dr. Brooks are having a conversation. And
no way.
Yeah. So we'll follow up with you on that.
That's going to be amazing.
Yeah. So something that I did want to ask, during your conversation with Bishop Barron, you guys go through suffering, through the problem of evil, to lots of different stuff. Was there anything specifically that kind of stood out to you as kind of a light going on?
Yeah, what you just brought up, the problem with evil. It's like, if there's a God, why are there such horrible things that happen in the world? And he explains that it's on such a broad, infinite scale that it's impossible for us to even understand. Like, many of these bad things may happen so that other good things can happen, or we can grow from them. You know, it's almost like a sci-fi movie where somebody goes back in time to kill somebody who ends up turning out to be a murderer, but then by killing them, they cause a far worse events later on in the future. You know, it's kind of like that, but much more profound. The way he communicated it was just, and it made a lot of sense. It made an absolute lot of sense. And I also think about the suffering that I've gone through in my life, and as terrible as it was, I grew a lot from those things. I mean, would we want to eliminate all challenges? What would that lead to? I don't think that would be necessarily a good thing. In fact, the pursuit of eliminating all challenges tends to lead to things like drug addiction and addiction to pleasure. And it's like working out. Like, the fact that working out is hard is part of the reason why it's beneficial. Not just the physical effects, but the fact that it's hard. So.
Yeah, totally. Well, you gave us a great analogy, I think, that helps with this reckoning with the problem of evil, which can never completely be solved in this life, even from our perspective. It's like Bishop Barron said, 1 year ago in the interview with you, we're talking about an intellect that is limitless, it's infinite. And so a lot of times when we come up with these arguments like, well, if God existed, he would do this. What we really mean by that is, if I were God, this is what I would do. Thinking from the perspective of a finite intellect, and an imperfect will too, mind you. But I remember, like, when I was 25 years old, I came back to the Catholic faith, to the Christian faith, really, because I was definitely on the fence of agnosticism. I had more than just doubts about Catholic doctrine. It went deeper than that. And I remember I had an experience that was the beginning of this conversion process, but that experience was profound. And I was changed, and that got the snowball rolling, as it were. But I remember waking up the next morning, still profoundly changed. But the first question I blasted somebody with the next morning was the problem of evil. I was, and so, like, there was like this intellectual conversion that had to unravel over the course of really a couple years. And in a way, still, I'm asking questions, and I'm trying to read books from different perspectives and speak with people from different perspectives, and even with my fellow Catholics or Christians or whatever, trying to refine what we believe and not just be kind of credulous and dogmatic without critical thinking behind what we accept to be true. But the analogy used about climbing a skyscraper and then having this view of everything from above versus just being placed on top of the skyscraper, it reminded me of a argument or really a defense, I guess, of God in the allowance of evil. John Hick, who's I believe he's a British philosopher. He might not be living anymore, but he provided what's called a soul-making theodicy. Theodicy is just a word for like an answer to the problem of evil, and really it's as simple as God in his infinite intellect, with his infinite foresight, allows us to kind of struggle along the way to build character, to really make our souls, to develop us and form us and chisel away at us. And that really helped me in my intellectual journey, along with what Bishop Barron said and things like that, to reckon with this problem of evil.
Totally. I think that's the point. The point is it's hard, and that we don't know. I feel like if that's the whole point of how we grow and learn. I mean, if we have to learn to help each other, and we also have to learn to move through it anyway. Jordan Peterson talks about it quite well. Talks about bearing your own, the cross, right? Like, that's you have to move through life, and anyway, even though it's very difficult and very tough. So I think that's the point. The fitness and health space has a lot of spiritual components. It's just not, at the moment, it's not Christian. It's a lot of crystals and meditation, and they don't say God, they say the universe, which is, they don't want to say God because God's not cool, so they want to say the universe. But people in the fitness and health space who stay there long enough and pursue it, they all come to that point where they start to realize that that's important. So I'm really happy to see someone like Bishop Barron, who's using new media to reach to reach people. And I think the wellness space is the best place to do it. I think if you can really make that case in the health space that this is going to make your life better and healthier, make you feel better, give you more meaning to your life, then I think people will kind of, once they see the value through that, maybe they'll be more open-minded and start to dive in a little bit deeper. And I tell you what, now's the time. We are in an interesting time now where, science, as much as I love science, it's amoral. It has to be amoral. It can't have morality. You do a test and then there's a result, and you decide if the test worked or not. So it can't have morality. But that's also its flaw. We're in a time now where science isn't asking if they could. They're asking, they're not asking if it's a good thing to do something. They're just asking, can we? Can we do this? Let's do it. So I think it's important that we inject a little bit of morality through the spiritual practices, because we're coming up. There's some interesting stuff that's going to start happening here in the next 50 years. And if we don't have a moral compass around science, we could really hurt ourselves.
Absolutely.
What's interesting too, that what is being used. I mean, I love meditation. We have a long tradition of meditation in the Catholic Church, and up to contemplation and numerous different things like that. But you also bring up like crystals and things like that. It's interesting how removed from the practice of religion, there's still these things that pop up of people desiring a mystic experience. So a crystal, for example, I mean, in the Catholic Church, we don't believe in that kind of thing, but we have sacramentals, right? We
right.
wear certain things that have been blessed and things like that. It's not a good luck charm by any means, and it's certainly not the same thing that like a crystal would be, but removed from the tradition of Christianity, or even just the tradition of religion in general. These things still pop up of a desire for that. It's kind of like the same thing of the money, power, fame, sex, all these things. You're filling a space that can't be filled by that, right? That's a God-spaced hole, and so there's a desire for it, and it seems like there is some things that they're trying to replace those with. But I totally agree with you that the fitness world, I think, is ready for this integration of a solid spirituality. And I think the mystic tradition, particularly in Catholicism, is going to be able to kind of awaken that a little bit. Because I just think that with like Joe Rogan with meditation and all these guys that are pure atheists, they're tapping into something that's desired. But anyway, I just think that you're hitting the nail right on the head, man.
Yeah, and I think that I really do think that there is a bit of a turning of the tide, if you will. I think, Christianity, Catholicism kind of had a decline in popularity. I think we're already starting to see a resurgence. And I just think that just tends to happen. The pendulum tends to swing. But I think this time around, it's a little bit different. And I can see it already. I can see that. I mean, we talk about it all the time. We'll talk about it. We don't. Here's the other thing: we really don't care what people think, so we're going to say what we believe to be true anyway. And I mean, again, at the end of the day, like for me, what really brought me to looking at the Christian tradition is it created a belief. It created some of the best societies ever. It really led to those beliefs. They didn't come out of nowhere. And was it some person's crazy idea? I don't think so. I think it goes a little deeper than that. I mean, the belief that all of us have these inalienable rights, that's a crazy thought, if you really think about it. Who would give that up? Who would give up their power, So I think there's a lot of value there, and I think that you're going to see some more interest start to pop up. And so I'm happy you guys are using new media for that. I think that's perfect. You need to use new media because it's decentralized. It's not controlled by as many powers. The bandwidth is unlimited. You can reach more people. Long-form conversation has made a comeback. That was gone for a long time. Like talking about religion. You can't really do that in 5 or 10 minutes. You need long discussions and podcasting. Speaking of Joe Rogan, his episodes are 2-3 hours long. So it's like it's perfect now. It's the perfect time for it.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I wonder if, and you can let me know if you agree with this. I wonder if this resurgence or this growing interest in things like meditation or these practices of the law of attraction, of making requests to the universe, or positive thinking so you can manifest your desires, or even trying to experience something like God. I mean, Rogan calls it the source. He's like, it felt like it was the source of everything, something like God. But, I wonder if in these sorts of practices that are becoming so common in the culture, if the appeal is, in a way, you're filling that void that, wealth, pleasure, power, honor, all those things don't seem to quite fill. Those are good things, but they're not the fulfillment of all your desires. So you go searching for something else that's beyond you. But the nice thing about those practices is that you encounter a God or some kind of a godlike thing that gives you what you can't seem to give yourself, but it makes no demands on you. It doesn't make obligations on your life, whether it's to do with worship or morality. There's no obligations. Do you think that that's like part of the appeal of those practices, is they want to be spiritual but not too spiritual?
I think it's the first step. I mean, I was there for a second. I think it's just the first step. You can't have any growth without practices, without challenging behaviors. It just doesn't work that way. And I do think that we're in an age now where we're getting more and more of what we thought we always wanted. I mean, people forget this, but it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have, like, food is so abundant now that the number one killer in regards to food is obesity. Like, people die of too much. We have everything we could ever want, and I think we're realizing that that's not what we want. And the more we get everything that we think we want, the more we're going to start to realize that's not everything. So I think that might be a part of it. It's just, life is a lot better for most people, better than it's ever been in material terms. And I think, once you get all that stuff and you're sitting there and you're like, okay, now what? I think we're getting a lot of that now.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, I think we're all on a journey. We're all at different parts of the journey, and we thought it would be interesting to talk to you a little bit about where you're at in your journey. So you've mentioned that you've been an atheist in the past. You've come to some realizations, and you're moving forward in this walk towards what's true, and what's true about reality beyond ourselves. So a year ago when you were talking with Bishop Barron, you said you were somewhere around agnosticism. At this point, we'd be interested to know, like, where are you at in that journey? And then we'll probably finish up with a question about Catholicism in general. But where are you at in your journey?
So I attend a church, Christian church. I would say on average 2 to 4 times a month. So I don't make every Sunday, but at least every other Sunday I'll go. I really value when I first went, I was very open-minded. Like, okay, I had to eliminate the mysticism aspect of it in order for me to listen to the rest of it. And I found a lot of value in that. And the irony of it is that opened me up to the mysticism. It's like, I see the value in it. Then I moved over and started to kind of pay attention to the mystical aspect. I'm at the point now where I never prayed before. I find myself praying now. I don't know if I'd consider myself a Christian or a Catholic, but that's the direction that I'm definitely moving. I will say this: I live more like I believe in God now than I ever did before. And I think actions are more powerful than words. So, I find myself moving more and more in that direction, and I find myself talking to my kids in that way more and more than I ever did. So, I don't know where this is going to lead, but it's brought me value. It's brought me a lot of value. So I've seen zero negatives from it. It's enhanced my ability to communicate on the podcast, because I think I have a different sense of understanding of myself. I have a different sense of empathy for other people. I don't know. I'm moving in that direction. I can't say I'm there yet, but I'm headed somewhere. And it seems like it's the right. It feels right.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's awesome, man.
So we'll finish off with. We want to respect your time, obviously, and
Sure.
We have a big question to finish with here. So you said you're kind of moving in the direction of Christianity and potentially even Catholicism. So we'd be interested to know, what's like the big barrier right now, do you think, to Catholicism from your perspective? But also, what do you find most attractive about the faith? We'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
So here's what's interesting. What holds me back, I think, is also what I think might pull me in. So the thing about that I found that was different from, now I was raised Catholic. Now we weren't super regular. It was like holidays, right? We go Easter and Christmas. But the thing that I didn't like about Catholicism was all of the ritualistic practices, with the incense and the stand and sit and all that stuff. But I'm starting to realize that just like with anything else, that's an important part of any practice, is that regular ritualization of certain things, whether you're getting ready for a heavy squat. It's funny, like I've been working out for a long time. If I'm going to go do a PR in my squat, I have a ritual, right? And I value it, right? I have a ritual before we do our podcast or before I speak in front of a large audience. And so I'm like, oh, okay, I can kind of see now, like this Catholicism has been around for a very long time. They have rituals and practices. And so it's funny, like that's the thing that's holding me back, but that's also the thing that I'm starting to find that's valuable, that I don't necessarily see in the Christian churches that I'm going to. The thing that I've always valued, not always, I'll say more recently, especially through talking through Bishop Barron, is the long history of intellectualism in the Catholic tradition. Thomas Aquinas and really examining a lot of these hard questions very deeply. I didn't realize that the Catholic Church played such a large role in the advancement of science, for example. I appreciate that self-examination, that debate and discussion. I really appreciate that. So that's something that I value a lot about the Catholic Church that I think separates itself from other practices.
That's awesome. It seems like what you're maybe seeing is that the church is very oriented to the human person as a whole. As we've already kind of talked about with you guys showing things, because like the ritual side is kind of the bodily engagement of it, the smells, yes, awakening your senses, the kneeling. It's literally you moving to do things. Even us taking communion, it's literally ingesting something, right? And then the same thing with like the intellectual side of the church. It's pushing the mind to try to figure out the highest things, right? And then the mystical side, more soul oriented. There's a long tradition of that there as well. But
yeah, you know what? Let me give you a cool example. So, praying before eating, right? Where you say a prayer before you have your meal. Now, this is from a purely fitness trainer, perspective, okay? If you look at someone who's praying before a meal and you're not religious, you may think, oh, that's silly. But then if you go a little deeper, and if you're about to eat a Pop-Tart, but you actually stop and you thank God for it, and you acknowledge that you are trying to nourish your body. You have a different level of respect over that food. The odds that you're going to feed yourself things that aren't good for you are lower. You're bringing awareness around your food, which is what I taught forever. But when I was an atheist, I taught awareness to my clients and it helped them with their nutrition. And that's what it is. And it's a ritual, right? It's a ritual. I'm stopping, I'm praying, I'm actively doing something. So I can see the value in those rituals, quite a bit, like you said, involving the body. Bishop Barron explained that to me as well, and it makes perfect sense.
It reminds me of, sorry, we're squeezing more time out of this, but this is such a great interview. Reminds me of Ben Greenfield's Christian Gratitude Journal. Have you ever heard of that before? Yeah.
Yes, I have. Yeah, so, absolutely.
And he's a great example of someone in your industry who's very subtly bringing his faith, into his holistic practice. And where I came, I had been listening to Greenfield for a while before I realized that he was a Christian. And then one day he mentioned meditation and prayer when he was talking about some of the, his daily routines. I thought, since when was it cool to say prayer? So then I did some digging. I was like, oh yeah, this guy believes in Jesus. And
yeah, that's what I love about new media. Is like, I don't have to worry about like corporate sponsors or whatever. I can say what I feel to be right or true, and people either buy our products or whatever, they don't, and no one's going to shut me off. So I think, if you said something like that on a mainstream TV, 20 years ago, they might have like, oh, no, don't talk about prayer. But you can do that now through new media. So I really think new media is such a phenomenal tool for what you guys are trying to do.
Yeah. That's awesome. Cool. Well, I guess for the last question, this is a question we ask for all of our guests. If you were to name one life-changing book or movie that's changed maybe your life, what would you recommend?
Oh, you know what? How about, can I name a series on that's now available on YouTube? But it was a series that was on TV maybe 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely.
Okay, Milton Friedman's Free to Choose. You can watch this on YouTube, and he explains how freedom benefits the disenfranchised, the common man, more than anybody else. That was very life-changing to me.
That's awesome.
Very good. All right, where can people find out more about what you're doing, Sal?
Cool. So the podcast is Mind Pump. You can find that on pretty much any platform. We have a YouTube channel called Mind Pump TV where we demonstrate exercise technique and form and whatnot. And then if you want to follow me individually, I'm on Instagram, and you find me under Mind Pump Sal.
Perfect.
All right, Sal.
Well, we're big fans of what you're doing, so keep up the good work. And thanks so much for joining us. Maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. All right. So that was an interview with Sal Di Stefano of Mind Pump Media. And now I'm back here with Jared Zimmer. Let's talk about the interview. I mean, there's lots of interest there. What stuck out to you?
I think the first thing that really stuck out to me was his response to what was attractive in Catholicism. Particularly, I mean, he says ritual, right? That there's something to that in the way that we worship. And I love how he made the connection between, just as human beings, we have our own rituals all the time. And so to make that connection with our relationship to the divine, I think a lot of times, especially because in the modern world, there's oftentimes sort of a negation of ritual, that they prefer things to be kind of more random and freewheeling. But to know, especially with his fitness background and all this stuff, that there are certain things that are going to, if you carry them out in a logical succession, they're going to make you more successful, right? So for example, proper form in a squat, being able to lift, the consistency of it, there's ritual to that. You've got your setups, you've got, different things like that. You also have ritual with how you eat, right? So if you're the type of person that likes to prep your meals for the week so that you know exactly what you're going to eat, there's a ritual that goes along with that causes consistency.
Yeah, well, as an athlete, and you probably know this from, being a football player and being involved with the sports you've been involved with, as a hockey player, I mean, we were pretty superstitious growing up with some of the rituals that we had before our games. And, you'd go out and do your warm up and you'd skate your laps before the game's about to start. And, you might, for every game of the season, tap the left pad of the goalie before the game starts. And if you accidentally miss and tap the right one, it bothers you. And, if you're super superstitious, then it can almost ruin your game.
Or you just don't wash your socks for the whole season?
Well, I don't know if that's ritual or what that is, but that's often the case. But I mean, as an athlete, that's a huge part. You put your right, again, going back to hockey, you put your right sock on before your left. And you look around the room and you ask every other guy, like, yeah, what's your rituals? And you'll usually know them because some of them are pretty weird. The guys in the room, but in the sports world, at home, holidays, Christmas time, Thanksgiving, whatever, rituals are everywhere. It's this deeply human thing that, it's not like we plan to be ritualistic, or it's not like some people are ritualistic and some people aren't. In some sense, we're all interested.
Yeah, I remember a TED Talk once that was talking about this guy that was struggling with going to sleep, and he found that the consistency of the going to sleep ritual, same time, same actions, all of that provided a much more feasible opportunity for him to fall asleep faster and better. Yeah. So things like at 8:30, I'm going to brush my teeth. At 9 o'clock, I'm going to have a book with me in the bed. Et cetera. And it causes the body to get used to the ritual. Yeah. So I love that we can take that kind of human element and say, so in worship, it's a similar thing, that consistency provides the most feasible ability to properly worship, and that that's been revealed to us.
Well, and there's something deeper theologically with, say, the rituals that we have in the Mass, for example. And this is something that's been largely lost since the Reformation in especially like evangelical churches, non-denominational services and stuff. You go to a Catholic Mass, and if people are doing, what they're supposed to be doing, and if people are familiar with what the rubrics say they should be doing, it's almost like synchronized worship.
Yeah.
And it's really,
as a community.
Right.
Yeah.
It's symbolic of the oneness of the body of Christ.
Yeah.
And so there's something really deeply theological and meaningful in that unity in ritual in the Mass, and I think it's a pretty powerful thing for people to see. My grandma, who's now passed away, one of the defining moments of her conversion to Catholicism was she was absolutely captivated by. She would just attend Mass with my grandpa, and at communion, she would always describe it. She was a square dancer, and so she often saw things like this as a dance. But she would describe how she would see people move down the aisle, and then together come down, receive communion, and come back. And she, for her to see the elegance and the beauty of the symmetry of that ritual, for her that really moved her to want to be Catholic. It's
That's
kind of
awesome.
an interesting thing.
That's awesome.
So
another thing that stuck out is the fact of this kind of growth of spirituality within the fitness world, that there is, because so often the fitness world is characterized or stereotyped as a body-only reality.
Right.
But in kind of a several generations removed from a very, very secular understanding of the human person, there's this kind of revamping of, no, there's more to it than just the body. There's the mind and the soul. And a lot of times that means that different spiritualities kind of pop up. And he mentioned like the crystals and these other things. And I just think that's really interesting because it's sort of like man naturally trying to go back to something that brings them to a metaphysical reality. And I love, it's an interesting thing that the crystals particularly, because at least in the Catholic Church, we have sacramentals. It's these physical things that remind us of the divine, or they might prepare us, as Bishop Barron always talks about with the rosary, that praying the rosary, it's not necessarily about the specific prayers each. It's getting you into a mode of reflection, getting you into sort of a mode to be more open to the divine. And so the fact that they're seeking physical things, it's just interesting that was part of the natural thing.
Yeah. And, the word spirituality is a word tossed around a lot today. As you know, I was a practicing chiropractor for several years before I came on with Word on Fire. And as part of my training, and this extends beyond chiropractic. You talk to Dr. Todd Warner, our managing editor for the Word on Fire Institute Journal. Him and I have had many conversations about this, but when a patient comes into the room, you're seeking to treat the whole person. And so you want to address the spirit, you want there to be a sort of spiritual encounter there as well. But when you use that word, a lot of times with people in the culture, they don't understand what it means. They understand that to treat themselves in wholeness, to treat others in wholeness, must require some kind of spiritual element. But they don't. If you ask people to go deeper and say, well, what do you mean by spirituality?
Yeah.
They don't necessarily know what that means. And so
Right.
they're kind of grasping. And so they're going for this crystal stuff. They're, going for some of the more superstitious or new agey interventions out there to try to discover what is this spiritual part of me that I at least sense or intuit is there.
Yeah.
But for us, we have a rich tradition of talking about the soul in the Catholic.
Yeah.
In the Catholic
When
tradition.
in the second episode that the Mind Pump guys had with Bishop Barron, they actually mentioned that, a lot of times they'll have customers come to them talking about how they want to lose, say, 30 pounds or something like that. But then you realize these people, this person has like super depressive tendencies. And so they would say, like, you need to get happy before you can actually, because it's about changing your routine. It's about changing the way you see things. And if you're in a depressed state, oftentimes you go to things that will medicate and et cetera. So it's almost as if like you're dealing with the whole person here, and there are steps, along the way.
Yeah.
So they do coach people in, getting into a happy state of life and trying to figure out what are the things that are drawing you down so that the desired goal of, say, losing 30 pounds, getting stronger or whatever, those can be fulfilled.
Yeah, well, and the deeper question is metaphysical there. It's like
Yeah.
you sense that there is something beyond your body that you need to care for. And it's sometimes hard for people to, like, again, put a name to what it is they're trying to care for. in the Christian tradition, we name it. You have a soul. You're not just a body. You are a body, but your body is animated by the soul. It's in this composite relationship with the soul. And so the human person is a composite of body and soul. So to care for the soul then requires this spiritual element of life. And part of that is recognizing that there is this God who is pure spirit, who has created us. And that, in the sense that we are rational because of this rational soul that we have, we are in the image and likeness of God. So we should be thankful as Christians that we have this like clarity about what it means to be spiritual and what it means to take care of yourself spiritually. And I think like when it comes to evangelization, this is something we need to maybe become more prepared to do, is go back, read the ancient arguments for the existence of the soul and understand what it means to have a soul, so we can talk intelligently about it and maybe introduce some clear concepts to people because they sense there's something like that, there at part of them. But I think people have a hard time really putting a finger on what exactly it is.
Yeah. And they have a phenomenal conversation around that specific topic. So any of our listeners that have not gone to Mind Pump Media and listened to that second episode with Bishop Barron, you can listen to Bishop Barron himself provide some of the tradition behind, the idea of the soul. And
I want to, before you jump into your next comment, I just want to recommend a book to our listeners. Go to Amazon and look up Theology and Sanity by Frank Sheed, and he's got
excellent.
Probably one of the best explanations I've seen, especially for those looking for an introductory explanation, which is still me, of what it means to have a soul and what are some of the arguments we have to show its existence. So
and then just one last piece. I think it's so interesting to see the relationship between fitness discipline and the Christian life. That when we talk about things like fasting, we talk about things like asceticism, those things are often ingrained in the fitness culture already. And so I think, for all of the folks listening as evangelists, for us to better be able to speak about those things and to partake in them ourselves. That's one of the best ways, I think, to do it, because we can speak about it. But it's an interesting point of contact with, everybody knows somebody who belongs to a gym and is working out if you're not doing it yourself. There's a gym on literally every corner in the post-Schwarzenegger world, And so because of that, there's a place of contact in the fitness realm that as evangelists we can start to operate on a common ground. And I think a lot of times those practices, such as fasting or thinking of exercise as asceticism, the basic discipline that it takes to achieve these kinds of goals, that's the Christian thing, right? Like that's part of what our spirituality is a disciplining of the person, and to remove the non-essentials.
Yeah, one of the things that attracts me to the fitness movement today, I think some people in a way have been seeking something to fill that religious void. Sure. They might be the first ones to tell you, I'm not religious. But we've talked before about how the CrossFit world has sort of become like this pseudo-religion in a way, and people are looking for community. They're looking to like realize a goal greater than them and to devote their lives and order their lives towards something bigger than themselves. But, I see some merit in this sort of fitness revolution that we're living in, where people are really starting, gyms are expanding everywhere. People want to be part of them. There's these ancient practices like you're saying that are being fostered and advocated for in these fitness communities, like you say, fasting and self-discipline, and just building a positive attitude. And ultimately, every time you go to the gym or every time you go, whatever your preferred workout is, I personally do not enjoy, like we've talked about this, I don't really enjoy just going to the gym and just lifting weights. It's like too uneventful for me. And I've had to do that for a lot of years just because like earlier in my life when I was not so old and decrepit, I was, involved with some elite level athletics where I had to train whether I wanted to or not. But what I like to do is compete. So I think like the important thing is people need to find some way to take care of their bodies, to find competition. And every time you compete, you're essentially entering into suffering, you're entering into a challenge, and you got to overcome it.
Yeah, well, and as Christians, we see the body as a gift.
Totally.
Right? And so part of treating a gift well is you're thanking the giver of that gift
Yeah.
by treating it well.
Your
right?
body as a temple is actually a biblical,
Right,
It's
exactly,
a biblical
exactly.
idea. So,
Yeah, well, another great discussion. And, again, for all of our listeners, if you are not currently part of the Word on Fire Institute, I would like to once again invite you to join us. So if you go to wordonfire.institute, you can sign up today, and you can get access to specialized courses in theology, philosophy, sociology, psychology, really anything that will make you a better evangelist. Along with that, you'll also get access to Word on Fire Digital, which houses all of Bishop Barron's films, topical studies, as well as some exclusive content in there, different talks he's given around the country, et cetera. And also, you will get a quarterly journal as an Institute member. There's also a lively forum inside of the Institute where you can partake in the community. So part of what we're trying to do here is to form evangelists who preach Christ to and with the culture. So again, go to wordonfire.institute, and we hope to see you inside.